This group of fathers have gathered before to talk.
So what's up, fellas? How you guys doing?
Doing all right, man.
Good.
Thanks for setting this up.
Good.
Yeah, man, thanks for coming.
But this time they're taking their message public, hoping this video will spark real change.
We came together today just to have a quick conversation about some of our feelings about growing up black and having our kids grow up black in East York, and being part of the education system.
For the 6 men, this is a place to share experiences and express their concerns. For viewers, it's a place to listen, to learn, and to understand. It was here in this park in East Toronto the dads met and began talking. Over the years, these passing conversations grew into so much more. Michael Avis and Carrie Cox are 2 of the fathers in the group.
We'll talk about race, we'll talk about what it's like working in the office where you're the only one. We'll talk about all those things. And that is a bond that with, some of my friends who aren't black, they just don't get it. And it's not their fault, but they just don't understand that conversation.
Talk about politics, we talk about, being black.
In 2021.
In 2021, Black Lives Matter, push for diversity and equity in the workplace. And there's some cynicism about it, some hope to do with it, what it means for our kids, what it means for us. We just get into all kinds of philosophical discussions about that kind of stuff.
What originally started out as chance encounters has now turned into a deep bond, a friendship each dad can depend on when they need support. You guys are getting together, you have discourse, you're talking about what's going on, and all of a sudden COVID hits and the world shuts down. Tell us what you learned from your kids learning online during the pandemic.
There was one instance where I was observing the class and I was hearing some things that kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable. And the first thing I did was I sent a WhatsApp to these guys and I said, hey fellas, I heard this, what should I do? And immediately they said, you need to call it out.
What were these teachers teaching that kind of got your back up a little bit?
First, I want to preface that I'm a teacher. The teachers have my full support. That being said, I don't think that there's proper training for teachers to talk about race. I don't think there's proper training for them to be able to speak meaningfully. This poor teacher is being asked to talk about this, and she doesn't have the training and the understanding of how her words can affect her students. And I felt badly for her, but I also felt badly for my kids when I thought, what are they thinking right now?
That wasn't the only concern they had.
Part of this discussion that we're having today is hoping.
So in March, they recorded their thoughts and emailed the video to their kids' principals and vice principals. What were you hoping to accomplish by putting the video out there?
There's definitely going to be some teachers out there, maybe some principals out there who are going to appreciate that. It'll give them a perspective that maybe they hadn't thought about, and it might influence the way they approach this next time.
There's a huge disconnect in the kinds of language, in the kinds of knowledge that educators are having, particularly white educators, but other racialized educators are having about blackness and blackness in Canada.
Funke Aladejebi is an assistant professor in the Department of History at the University of Toronto.
There are people in our school boards, there are people who are working in the Ministry of Education who are deeply invested in creating models, in creating important language that educators need to use and adapt and take into the classroom. But for some reason, there is this disconnect.
That's because there isn't a standard level of training for Canadian teachers. It differs from province to province.
So there are pockets and schools and institutions that are doing it well. There are educators in individual classrooms that are thinking critically about how to address and speak to their black students. And then there are schools that aren't doing it well. And as a result, we don't have a uniform way of understanding whether or not we're doing it right.
What I see in the work that I'm doing now is that we seem to have taken a major step backwards because we can't seem to deal with a multiplicity of issues.
Sadie Keene has been fighting for equity in schools for more than 50 years. She was Vancouver School Board's first black trustee and helped to write the race relations policy in the 1980s.
In terms of policy, it is really easy for institutions right now to say, oh, well, we've done that. That's been dealt with. It's often people who have not been directly impacted or affected by racism and hate who are making those decisions.
Experts say Canada's inability to move the needle forward is caused by the country's failure to confront its long-standing history with colonialism.
When colonial models came in, education was structured around religious-based institutions. And then it starts to consolidate itself, and when it does that, it doesn't envision certain groups of people as being part of the Canadian citizenry, and as a result, racialized folks, Indigenous folks, Black people are excluded from those conversations entirely.
Many Canadians assume segregated schools are unique to the U.S., but it happened in Canada too. One example, Ontario's Common School Act of 1850 led to segregated schools.
More often than not, the Common School Act was actually used to separate children from classroom spaces to further demarcate that separation by race. And this becomes a continuous problem that we see even in our own current present-day schooling practices.
Nova Scotia had legislation as well, and to some extent, similar practices were taking place in Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, and British Columbia.
I do think that we need to have a complete overhaul of our education system, or really have a forceful conversation about educational reform. But Black community members have been talking about this for as far as 1960s and 1970s, when they've been asking, right, our curriculums to change, to speak to the Black experience in really important ways. And we've not yet been able to do that well.
We need to reimagine education. There's so much that we can do, right? That the opportunities for making and supporting education to truly be much more inclusive and dynamic, and really support them to be able to move into a world that is calling on all of us to be our very best selves.
It's why the dads made the video, to help provide schools the tools to reimagine. Back at the park, the friends have come together again. What can you suggest they do to change or to improve?
There's a lot of questions about what the responsibility of a Black parent or a Black or brown person is in educating people about what they should think about and how they should speak to people. We took it as, let's give some specific tools that educators can do to start to make immediate change.
I'd just love to see more, educators that look like me, whether it's supply teachers or, for plays or musical presentations or scientists and so on to share.
Michael points to the fact that the fathers are available to help. He's a college professor. Carrie is an engineer. And the others, well, there's an executive, a doctor, a photographer, a project manager, and one has a book being released later this year. So principals have a deep well of resources to draw upon.
Be mindful of the language. Othering language is damaging. Using words like they or them when referring to different cultures and different ethnic backgrounds automatically excludes. So we should be talking about us as a community and not about, well, they need this and Black Lives Matter, them. It's not them, they're part of our community, they're part of us. Inclusive language, inclusive literature, and representation. Those were three things that we said to these principals. These are things that you can do. This is low-hanging fruit.
The fathers emailed the 4 schools their kids attend. At the time of our interview, only one school had acknowledged receiving the video, and the fathers offered to help. Global News contacted the schools. Since then, all principals have reached out to the respective dads. Where do you take this from here?
I don't know. We're at a watershed moment. I think there's a lot of awareness. There's a lot of, every school has a diversity committee. It's on the radar. People are aware of it. I just hope, and this is the reason that I'm here, these are not just words. The fact that you put a committee somewhere does not mean anything if that committee doesn't do anything. We've given this to you on a silver platter. We've said, here are some easy things that you can do to make change. I don't know what the next step is, but I hope this can start a conversation, a deeper conversation about what are we really doing? Are we ticking boxes or are we really doing something different? And that I don't have the answer to.